It's late on the night of April 4th, 1991, in Clinton, Missouri. Angela Hammond is standing outside the food barn, leaning against a payphone, talking to her fiancé. It's a normal call, easy, familiar, the kind you don't think twice about. And then somewhere in the middle of that conversation, Angela notices something. A truck. She mentions it casually at first, just something passing through the parking lot. But then it comes back, and then again. Each time a little slower and a little closer. Now it has her attention, because it's not just passing through anymore. It's circling her. And then it stops. The driver gets out, starts walking toward her. Angela stays on the phone, describing what she's seeing as it's happening. There's a brief interaction, a pause, and then a scream. And then Angela is gone. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Case Uncovered, where we uncover some of the most compelling and lesser-known true crime cases. I'm your host, Jen Rivera, and this is Missing in the Midwest, a series where I cover unsolved disappearances across the Midwest, cases that leave behind questions, uncertainty. There are thousands of missing persons cases across the country. Some receive national attention, but many do not. And every single one of those cases represents a life that was interrupted and a family that's still waiting for answers. Today's case takes us to Clinton, Missouri, a small town where a 20-year-old woman disappeared while on the phone with her fiancé. And what makes this case so difficult to sit with is that someone was listening as it happened. This is the abduction of Angela Hammond. Clinton, Missouri is a small town with a population of around 9,000 people. It's located about an hour outside of Kansas City. It's the kind of place where people grow up together, where families know each other, and where your life is often shaped by the same streets, same schools, and the same community that you've always known. That's the kind of place Angela Marie Hammond grew up in. Angela, or Angie as everyone called her, was born on February 9th, 1971 to her parents, Marcia and Chris. She spent her childhood in Clinton surrounded by that same small-town community. And by the time she reached her late teens and early 20s, people already had a sense of who she was. She was described as outgoing, popular, stylish, and independent. She was someone who stood out, not in a way that drew attention for the wrong reasons, but in a way that people noticed. She had a personality that made it easy to connect with and easy to remember her by. After high school, Angie made the decision to attend Central Missouri State University. Like a lot of people her age, she was trying to figure out what her next step looked like. But after about a year and a half, she realized that college wasn't the right path for her. And instead of forcing something that didn't feel right, she made a different choice. She decided to go back home, and she went to work. Angie took a job as a night computer operator at Union State Bank in Clinton. It was a stable job, a routine, something that grounded her day-to-day life. And while it may not have looked like the path she originally thought she would take, it was still a path forward. She was building something, just in a different way. In the fall of 1990, Angie started dating Rob Schaefer. And this wasn't someone who came out of nowhere. Rob had grown up around her family. There was already a level of comfort and trust that you don't always get when you meet someone new. Rob was athletic. He had plans to join the military. He had a clear direction of what he wanted to do with his life. And the relationship between the two of them developed really quickly, not in a rushed or chaotic way, but in a way that felt really natural, like something that made sense for them. By early 1991, their relationship had shifted into something more serious. Angie found out she was pregnant. She was due in September, and that moment could have gone a lot of different ways. But according to everything that's been shared about this case, it didn't create distance. It brought them closer together. Rob was really excited. He stepped into that moment, and he decided to propose. Angie said yes. They weren't just dating anymore. They were building a future together, planning a life and preparing to become parents. And by all accounts, they were very much in love. That matters, because when you look at cases like this, you have to understand what was at stake and the family dynamic. These weren't two people in transition or trying to figure things out. These were two people in the middle of building a life together, building something real, a relationship, a family, a future that was already beginning to take shape. And on April 4th, 1991, that future still felt intact. By the time April 4th came around, Angie and Rob were moving through a part of their relationship that felt really steady and exciting. They had fallen into a good rhythm together, spending time with each other, being around family, making plans for what came next, and that night followed that same pattern. Earlier in the evening, they had gone to a barbecue at Angie's mother's house. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It wasn't a celebration or an event that would later stand out in a really significant way. It was simply just time spent with family, the kind of evening that blends into so many others when you look back on it later. They talked, they ate, they were surrounded by people who knew them, people who were part of Angie's everyday life. And nothing about that time together suggested that anything was about to change. And around 9 p.m., they left. Angie drove Rob home, the way she had likely done many times before, the way that felt routine at that point. Rob wasn't planning to go out again right away. He was going to stay home to babysit his younger brother and wait for his mom to get back home. The plan between them was simple. She would go on with her night, and he would stay home. Once his mom returned, they had plans to meet back up again. There was no urgency in that plan, no tension, no reason to think it wouldn't happen exactly the way they expected. And that's what makes this part so important. Because when you look back at cases like this, there's often a moment where everything still feels normal, where nothing has shifted yet, and where no one realizes they're moving towards something that will change everything. And this was that moment. After dropping Rob off, Angie didn't go straight home. She continued her night in the same way she normally would have, without any indication that anything was out of place. At some point, she went to spend time with her best friend, Kyla. And that detail is important more than it might seem at first, because it reinforces how ordinary this timeline really was. Angie wasn't rushing from one place to another. She wasn't distracted. She wasn't dealing with anything unusual. She was spending time with someone she loved, she trusted, and someone who knew her well. Someone who would have noticed if something felt off. But nothing did. There's nothing in that part of the timeline that suggests fear, concern, or even hesitation. And eventually, Angie left. She got back in her car and continued on with her night, still following the plan she had already talked about with Rob. At approximately 11:24 p.m., she made a phone call. And this is where the timeline becomes incredibly specific. Because from this point forward, everything is anchored to that call. Angie drove to the intersection of Jefferson and 2nd Street in downtown Clinton, near the Food Barn grocery store, which was about 7 blocks from Rob's house. And even though it was technically in town, this wasn't an area that stayed active late at night. Most people who were out would have been closer to the courthouse square, not here. At that hour, it was really quiet. And there were 2 phone booths at that location. So Angie pulled in, parked her Ford Mustang facing the booths, and got out of the car. Then she walked up to make the call. Angie called Rob to let him know she was tired, and that she wasn't going to meet back up with him like they had originally planned. Instead, she was going to go home, take a bath, and call it a night. It's a simple detail, but it matters, because it tells you exactly where she was mentally in that moment. She wasn't distracted, she wasn't upset, she wasn't dealing with anything that would have pulled her attention elsewhere. She was just winding down, ending her night in the most ordinary way possible. And this is where context becomes so important, because today, that moment would look completely different. But in 1991, there were no cell phones, no texting, no quick way to check in with someone while sitting in your car. If you wanted to talk, you used a landline or a payphone. So Angie being there, standing at that phone booth talking to Rob, wasn't unusual. It was routine. It was completely normal. And then, while Angie's on the phone, something changes. As she continues talking to Rob, the conversation doesn't immediately change in tone, but her attention begins to shift in a way that's subtle at first. She mentions a truck. Not with urgency or fear, just something she's noticing while she's standing there, looking around and passing time the way anyone would in that situation. A green pickup had driven by. At that point, it doesn't stand out as anything more than a passing observation. But then it comes back. And then it comes back again. And now the pattern starts to take shape. Because this isn't a truck that passed once and moved on. Now it's circling, moving through the same area repeatedly, enough that it breaks the natural rhythm of that space, especially at that hour of the night when very little else is happening. And that's when Angie starts paying closer attention. She begins describing it in more detail, not because she's alarmed yet, but because she's trying to understand what she's seeing. Rob asks her what it looks like, and she tells him it looks like his truck. A Ford, older, green, worn down. The kind of truck that stands out, not because it's new, but because it looks like it's been around for a while. And then she notices something really specific. Something that shifts this from casual observation into something more intentional. There's no front license plate, and in Missouri, there should have been one. That detail doesn't feel accidental. It doesn't feel like something you ignore. And now, without fully saying it, the tone of the moment begins to change. Because she's no longer just noticing something around her. She's starting to question it. At some point during that call, the truck pulls into the parking lot. And this is the moment where everything shifts. The movement stops being something she's watching from afar. Now it's immediate, it's close, and the driver gets out of the truck. Angie begins describing him as he approaches. She tells Rob he's a white male, that he has black hair, that he has a beard, possibly a mustache. She notices he's wearing glasses, a dark baseball cap, and overalls. She makes a point to say that he looks dirty. That detail comes through clearly because it's not just about what he's wearing, it's about how he appears. And that's something people instinctively notice when someone enters their space unexpectedly. He walks up to the phone booth next to hers, not past her, not at a distance, right next to her, and he uses the phone. And for a moment, everything slows down because now there's proximity. Now there's a shared space between the two. And now there's an interaction that didn't exist just seconds before. Rob is still on the phone, listening to everything as it unfolds, trying to piece together what's happening based on what Angie's telling him. At one point, he suggests that she ask the man if he needs to use the phone, maybe thinking the line isn't working, trying to make sense of the situation in a practical way. So she does. She asks him. And the man responds calmly that he'll try again in a minute. There's nothing aggressive in that response, nothing that immediately signals danger. And that's what makes this moment important. Because for a brief second, things feel like they could return to normal, like whatever this is might just pass. The man then walks back to his truck, and for a moment, there's space again, distance. But he doesn't leave. And that's what keeps this moment unsettling, because instead of driving away, he stays. After the man walks back to his truck, there's a brief shift in the atmosphere, the kind that's hard to explain but easy to feel. For a second, Angie could breathe, and it may seem like it might not be such a scary situation after all. And at that moment, it would have been easy to assume that whatever felt off was over, that the man would get in his truck and leave, that the situation would return to what it had been just minutes earlier, quiet, uneventful, and forgettable. But it doesn't. Because instead of getting into his truck and driving away, the man continues to stay. He remains there near his vehicle, not moving, not leaving, but lingering. And then he does something that shifts the tone again. He takes out a flashlight, and he starts moving it around the truck, across the ground, around the vehicle, as if he's looking for something. At least, that's what it appears to be. But the movement doesn't fully make sense because there's no urgency to it, no clear purpose. Just slow, deliberate motion that keeps him there longer than he should be. And this is where the moment becomes even harder to rationalize because now there's a pattern. He had been circling, he approached, he interacted, he returned to his truck, and now he's staying, watching, lingering. And even then, Angie and Rob continue talking because that's what people do in moments like this. They try to normalize what feels off. They try to keep the situation grounded. They try to convince themselves that whatever's happening isn't what it feels like. The shift from tension to action happens without warning. There's no gradual escalation, no clear signal that gives Angie time to react. One moment, she's still on the phone, still talking, still aware of the man near her. And the next, Rob hears her scream. It's immediate, sharp, the kind of sound that doesn't leave room for interpretation. And then, almost just as quickly, he hears something else. The man's voice. Clear enough to understand, calm enough to be unsettling. I didn't need to use the phone anyway. And then, silence. The line goes dead. There's no transition, no explanation, and no follow-up. Just a moment that begins and ends in seconds. And on the other end of that call, Rob is left with nothing but what he just heard. Trying to process it, trying to catch up to something that has already moved past him. Because in that moment, before anything else is confirmed, before anyone arrives, before anything is understood, he knows something has gone very wrong. Rob doesn't hesitate. He drops the phone and moves immediately. There's no pause to question what he heard, no delay to think through what it could mean. He knows where Angie is. He knows exactly where she had been standing, and he drives. Fast, straight toward the location. The distance between them is short, only 7 blocks, minutes at most. And that detail is so difficult to sit with because Rob isn't far away. He's not trying to piece together where she might be. He knows exactly where she's at. And when he arrives, it's not long after everything happened. The moment is still fresh. It's still unfolding. And as he pulls into that area, he sees it. The same green pickup truck, leaving, moving away from the scene. And in that instant, something clicks into place. Not as a guess or as a possibility, but as instinct. This is the truck. This is connected. And as it passes him, there's a moment that confirms it. A voice coming from inside the truck, calling out, "Robbie." And that moment is everything because she's there. She's alive. She's close enough to be heard, close enough to know he's there, close enough that for a split second, it feels like he might be able to reach her. And he turns around immediately and follows the truck. He pushes forward, closing the distance, trying to catch up and trying to get close enough to see, to stop it, to do something, anything. And for a moment, it feels possible, like he might actually catch up with them, like the distance between them is small enough to close. But then, everything changes again. His transmission fails, right there in the middle of the chase. The truck gives out, and just like that, he loses momentum. He loses distance and loses the ability to keep going, and the green pickup truck continues forward, driving away, taking Angie with it. After his truck fails, Rob is left there on the road in a moment that doesn't fully register right away, because everything that just happened moved way too fast. From the phone call to the scream to the drive to the chase, it all unfolded in a matter of minutes. And now, just as quickly, it's over. The truck is gone. Angie is gone. And what's left is the realization of how close he was. Close enough to hear her voice. Close enough to see the truck. And close enough to believe, even if just for a moment, that he might be able to stop it. And now there's nothing left to chase, nothing left to follow. And the reality of what just happened, and the understanding that whatever comes next, is going to look very different from everything that came before it. There is something about this case that stays with you in a different way because Angie wasn't in a situation that felt dangerous. She wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary. She was making a phone call, talking to someone she trusted, standing in a place that at the time felt completely normal. And within minutes, everything changed. That's what makes cases like this so difficult. They don't begin in chaos, they begin in moments that feel safe. Moments that are familiar, that are routine. And that's why being prepared matters, even in moments that don't feel like they should require it. Safely is a brand that focuses on personal safety tools designed for real-life situations. The Safely Sidekick is something I personally carry. It's compact, it attaches right to your keys, and it includes a personal alarm, a flashlight, pepper spray, and a glass breaker. It's something you can carry with you at all times without it being bulky or getting in the way. If you'd like to learn more about Safely products and purchase your own Safely Sidekick, Visit livesafely.co and use code JEN for 10% off your order. Thank you to Safely for sponsoring today's episode. Now let's get back to the case. After the chase ends and the truck disappears, everything again shifts. Rob is no longer chasing. He's no longer moving. He's left with what he just experienced and the reality that Angie is gone. From there, the response begins. Law enforcement is contacted, and officers arrive in the area where Angie had been just minutes before. And what they're stepping into is not a scene filled with answers. It's a scene defined by absence. Angie's car, her Mustang, is still there, parked exactly where she left it, facing the phone booths. Everything that happened took place outside of the car, in that small space between where she had been standing and where the truck pulled in. And that detail becomes one of the most important parts of this case because it tells investigators that whatever happened so quickly, and it happened right there. From the beginning, the focus of the investigation was clear. Find the truck, find the man. Because there is a description, and not just a general one, a detailed one. An older model green Ford pickup, late 1960s to early 1970s, possibly two-tone, with a distinctive mural or decal across the back window, described as water or a fish jumping out of water. Possible damage to the front fender, no front license plate. That level of detail is important because it gives investigators something specific to work from. And they do. They begin searching, running records, following leads, looking for anything that matches that description. At one point, over 1,600 trucks are investigated. And still, nothing leads to a confirmed suspect. And that's one of the most frustrating parts of this case, because this wasn't vague, this wasn't unclear. There was a vehicle, a description, a timeline, and yet it was never found. As with many cases like this, the investigation didn't just stay focused outward. It also turned inward, toward the people closest to Angie. And that included Rob. He was the last person to speak to her, the one who heard what happened, and the one who chased the truck. And in any investigation, that level of proximity is going to be examined. He was questioned, looked at closely, his timeline was reviewed, and his actions were examined. And that's part of the process, because investigators have to rule out every possibility. But ultimately, Rob was cleared. There was no evidence tying him to what happened, and his account remained consistent. From the moment of the call, to the chase, to everything that followed. And that leaves the focus where it started, on the truck and the man inside it. As the investigation continued, other witnesses began to come forward. Two women, Michelle and Jennifer, reported seeing a truck that matched the description, a green pickup, with a mural on the back window, in the same general time frame. But even with those additional sightings, nothing definitive came from it. No identification, no location, no suspect. Just more confirmation that the truck existed and then disappeared. Over time, investigators and the public began looking at whether Angie's case could be connected to others. Two names that came up in those discussions are Trudy Darby and Cheryl Ann Kenny. Both cases involve women who were abducted under different circumstances, but within a similar time frame. And while no official connection has ever been confirmed, the similarities have raised questions about patterns, about possibility, about whether the person responsible for Angie's disappearance could have been involved in something else. But without a suspect, without a vehicle, those connections remain unanswered. Years later, in 2006, another theory emerged, one that suggested Angie may not have been the intended target, that her abduction may have been a case of mistaken identity. The theory centered around another woman named Angela, someone whose father had been a narcotics informant. The idea was that the wrong Angela may have been taken, and while that theory added another layer to the case, it never led to a confirmed answer. It introduced possibility, but not resolution. More than 3 decades later, Angela Hammond has never been found. Her case remains unsolved. And what makes this case so difficult is how much was there. The phone call, the description, the witness, the chase, the voice heard in real time. So many pieces that feel like they should have come together, and yet they never have. For her family, this isn't something that exists in the past. It's something they continue to carry every single day. A moment that never ended, a night that never made any sense, and a question that still hasn't been answered. What happened to Angie? If you have any information about the abduction of Angela Hammond, please contact the Clinton Police Department at 660-885-2679. No detail is too small, and any information you might have could lead to getting this case solved. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of Case Uncovered's Missing in the Midwest, and for listening to Angie's story. Make sure to follow the show wherever you're listening to podcasts so you don't miss when I post new episodes every Tuesdays and Thursdays. And the best way to support the show so I can continue bringing you cases like this every week is to leave a 5-star rating and review. I do see the reviews and read them, and I'm so grateful for those who have already done so. It really does help push these episodes out so more people can listen and find them. And you never know, it could lead to somebody who knows something about the case. To learn more about my real-life advocacy work through my nonprofit, The Reignited Project, you can visit thereignitedproject.com. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe out there.